No, the day of graduation last year, we ate at Chabella with my parents. And the night one's the worst one. It's like 45 minutes.
Tori, Savannah. Sounds good to me. Oh, Van Brimmer. He's not AJC, is he? Did he move on to the AJC? He used to be with Savannah Morning News. Adam Van Brimmer. I think he's Savannah Morning News, unless he's the editor. Yeah, I guess he's moved on. That's why he's covering Savannah. He's probably their Savannah guy.
You guys break it yesterday? We'll try one more time. There we go. All righty. Good morning. And again, welcome to the February 6, 2025 Audit Committee meeting for Savannah Chatham County Public Schools. The arrival of Dr. Hoskins Brown, we will call the meeting to order. Has everyone had a chance to review the agenda? Are there any questions or additions? Seeing none, I'll entertain a motion to approve the agenda. It's been properly moved and seconded that we approve the agenda for today's meeting. All in favor? The agenda is approved. The first item on the agenda is the approval of the minutes from our November 21, 2024 meeting. Has everyone had a chance to review those minutes? Are there any comments, additions, or modifications? Yes, ma'am.
Good morning. Thank you. Just a minor edit on the minutes. If all of the titles could be consistent, either we're going to list degrees for all participants on documents or not degrees for all folks.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
We'll go with listing them. That would be my recommendation. All right. With that one clarification, is there a motion to approve the minutes? It's been properly moved and seconded that we approve the minutes from the November 21st, 2024 meeting. All in favor? Aye. The minutes are approved. Over there. Okay, before we get into the audits, I do want to take a moment to introduce two new committee members, Board Member Stephanie Campbell from District 7 and McLean Caldwell from CCMG. We also are having Bryce is joining us. Bryce Everett will join us. I don't know if he's going to be at this meeting yet. Yeah. So we welcome both of you to the committee and thank you for your service. And with that, I'll turn it over to Ms. Underwood.
Thank you and good morning. So this first audit, it would be the fiscal 24 external financial audit, and if I can lean that back to George. So we have to make a decision. The Malden and Jenkins crew is not here this time to present that audit in their findings. So George, if I'd like to pass that back to you.
So we moved this audit committee meeting to support activities of the legislative session, i.e. Chatham Day. So they're not able to be here. There are no findings in the audit, and our role is just to recommend this to the board, to the actual school board. So unless someone on the committee has a question for Malden Jenkins, my thinking is that we can pass this to the board for approval, and then Malden Jenkins will be there at the board meeting if there are any specific questions.
I'm not sure of that. Will they be able to make the board meeting?
I do have just one question, and I've been asking this for the last 2 years. Will, going forward, will we be putting out an RFP for our external audit?
Rosalind, if you would like to come up and speak to that, please.
Good morning, everyone. Yes, Mr. Moss, we do an RFP for our external audit services. We are on the last year of that, so the RFP will go out for next year because we have one more year on it.
Oh, it was a 3-year contract?
Yes,
Okay.
so they will audit us for next year, and then after, after that one, it will go back out.
Okay. Thank you.
And as for the board meeting, Rosalind will follow up with them to see if they can attend
Yeah,
that as needed, if the board members need that for the.
And I'm looking at the board members here. Is that acceptable?
Okay. She'll
Okay.
follow up on that.
Then we still need then to make a motion to recommend this to the board.
Correct.
So I will accept a motion to accept the FY 2024 internal audit for submission to the board. It's been properly moved and seconded that we recommend the FY 2024 external financial audit to the Board of Education. All in favor? The report is forwarded. All right, thank you very much. Yes, ma'am.
I'm assuming we're getting ready to transition into the attendance audit,
That is where we are going.
and I know that is one that many of you are eager to hear about and ask many questions about, so I won't delay this, but I just want to, for the sake of introducing this topic, this is one that we asked for because, as we know, attendance, not only here in Savannah, Chatham County, but across the country, has not fully rebounded from COVID. And in our case in particular, it has rebounded even slower. And so we know there are potentially many root causes to that, and we're working on multiple strategies. I want to, before the questions arise, I'm going to say that much of the response, my response to this, has to do with monitoring and accountability. And so questions about, are we training people? Do people know what to do? The answer is yes. It's an issue of, are we following through with monitoring and accountability? And so that's the answer to many of your questions in advance. That will be my response to many of the questions in advance. I fully own the results of this audit, and we have to do better.
Yes, ma'am, thank you.
All right, good morning. So as Dr. Watt said, we have completed our audit of student attendance. For the audit, we had 3 objectives. Our first objective was to review the district policies and procedures related to attendance, both in-person and virtual attendance, to determine compliance with federal, state, local guidelines. We were looking to review the district's procedures for monitoring attendance and systems in place for supporting school attendance teams. And we were looking to identify factors that influence student attendance and procedures for addressing absenteeism. Some background on attendance. We all have an idea of what student attendance is, obviously. Student attendance is an important measure because it's seen as an indicator of learning opportunities, student opportunities. So obviously the more frequently students are in school, the more learning that can take place. Compulsory attendance laws in Georgia require students to be in school, to attend school from the ages of 6 up to 16, and that's reflected in Godot policy, district policy. And when we talk about attendance, a lot of times it's reported relative to chronic absenteeism. Chronic absenteeism is when students are absent more than 10% of the enrolled days. So for a 180-day calendar like ours, they'd be absent 18 days would qualify as chronically absent. And that's the measure that's used by Godot when calculating CCRPI. And like Dr. Watts said, since the COVID pandemic, attendance has decreased significantly. And it's not just an issue within the district, it's a statewide issue and really a nationwide issue. In conducting the audit, we had 3 observations come out of it. So first has to do with implementation of attendance procedures, also documentation of procedures for monitoring student attendance, and then identifying factors that contribute to student absenteeism. So our first observation has to do with implementation of attendance procedures. We found multiple areas where policies and procedures related to student attendance are implemented inconsistently. So we looked at a few different things here. First thing we looked at was just the district's policies and how they align with any federal, state guidelines, and found that we are in compliance with all applicable policies. There is a little confusion over how truancy is defined, some conflicting language in Georgia law, and so the definition the district has chosen to adopt is under the guidance of the county attendance protocol and the county court system. So within the district, it's defined as 10 days. 10 unexcused absences or more students are defined as truant. We looked at some different forms of documentation. One is 5-day attendance letters. So when students have 5 unexcused absences, that's supposed to trigger a letter to be sent home to the family with the dates to notify them of these absences. And these are supposed to be kept, a copy of the letter is supposed to be kept in students' files. So we asked for copies of letters from a sample of students and found that in most cases, and we were looking at letters from the previous school year, so 23-24, and found that these letters in general aren't being kept year to year. So only 2 of the 53 letters that we asked for were made available. We looked at attendance on in-person and e-learning days and compared the two and found some disparities between the two, where in most cases there were fewer absences on e-learning days. We weren't able to determine to what degree that has to do with the barriers that might contribute to student absences are different, where transportation's not an issue on e-learning days, but did want to just highlight those disparities. We looked at attendance recording by teachers. Attendance is recorded differently at elementary and K-8 versus middle and high school levels, so we had to look at each of those a little bit differently. For elementary and K-8 schools, the homeroom teacher records attendance just at the beginning of each school day, and for those teachers, we found that 2/3 recorded attendance every day over a 2-week period, and over 90% of the teachers recorded attendance at least 9 out of 10 of those days. In middle and high school, attendance is recorded each block. So the first few minutes of each block, the teacher is recording attendance, and found that 37% of the teachers in our sample recorded attendance for every block over that same 2-week period. And then we also asked about attendance waivers. This is included in board policy JBA. And found that at 11 of the 12 schools in our sample, they haven't been using attendance waivers. So for this observation, we had 4 recommendations. First was to create an online review module, online video module for school staff related to the documentation requirements related to student attendance. We were looking to develop written procedures, or recommend to develop written procedures for monitoring teachers' recording of attendance on e-learning days to ensure compliance with established procedures. Recommend identifying strategies to increase the frequency of attendance recording at secondary schools, and review the current use of attendance waivers within the district to determine if their implementation aligns with board policy.
Thank you, Jack. Are there any questions? Ms. Campbell?
So when you say that we are in compliance, does that mean that referrals were sent for these excessive numbers of absences that were actually reported?
I'll get to that a little bit more because in compliance, I'm looking at what is written in board policy and the procedures that are written. Do those align with state guidelines? And then in general, like, are those being implemented in the school? So what we were looking at for that specific objective, the things we were looking at, we were in compliance as far as written procedures.
So then I guess my next question, which this is an excellent audit, by the way, very thorough, great job, very transparent. But with that being said, in the plan, if one of the processes that we're going to now try to implement is to make sure that these attendance rules and guidelines are written down, has that not happened at a school level yet, or is there some other reason?
So again, I'll get to that. The next one has to do more with documentation.
Okay.
And so the importance of documentation is to verify that things happened.
Okay.
So in talking with the staff at the schools that were in our sample, the procedures, it seemed, are being implemented, but there isn't always documentation
Okay.
to support that.
Okay. Thanks.
Dr. Rice.
At the beginning of your report, according to Georgia law, kids 6 to 16 have to be in school. So when you do your counting, do you exclude kids over 16 when you talk about absences and attendance?
I don't believe they were included in our sample. I can go back and confirm that, but I think.
I'll just say, when we
Dr.
look at attendance across the district, we don't exclude kids that are above 16. We look at attendance for all kids. So just because Georgia law says mandatory age is, stops at 16, if a student is enrolled in our school, we monitor their data just like we do any other student in the district.
My question was they included in the audit? Anybody
In
over?
your samples, did
Yeah.
you include any?
I'll have to go back. I didn't specifically exclude them from the sample. One thing that did come up in discussions is how the steps that attendance committees are able to take with students. And there are fewer options for students over that age because they have the option of just withdrawing, whereas, 15-year-olds don't have that option.
Are there any other questions? Very, very quickly, Jack, and again, I echo this is a great report. In the background section, just so we're not burying the lead, we've seen a 34% drop in attendance in high schools since 2023. And am I reading that right? On page 4.
On page 4. Yes.
Okay. So we
Yeah,
have,
so from pre-pandemic levels, and so I looked at attendance for the district in comparison with other districts within the state, similar districts. And pre-pandemic, our attendance was much higher. We were the top district, I believe, across the board at all levels. And so our attendance, because we were higher, we had farther to fall as well. So now we're middle
right, but
of the
this
pack.
this 34%, this isn't a relative metric. This is where attendance was this in 2019, and it's a third less in 2023 in high school.
So this,
Is it that
yeah,
simple,
so
or-
students pre-pandemic, if chronic absenteeism or students that weren't chronically absent, that's what they're reporting in the Godot database. It was, students who weren't chronically absent was just under, I believe, 90%. So it was somewhere in the 80s, and so now it's dropped, yes.
So we used to have 80% that weren't chronically absent, and now we have 66% of 80, whatever that is. I can't do the math that fast.
Yeah, it's somewhere in the 50s, I believe.
Okay. So 50% of our high school students are chronically absent. Okay. And then the numbers aren't as bad for elementary. It's 14 is the 14% drop is that's just K to 5 elementary. And the 12 schools, what was the, not one of the names, but the split between, was it 6 elementaries and 6 high schools, or how did you?
It was 3 elementary, 2 K-8, 2 middle, 4 high schools, and then the district's virtual school.
Okay, thank you. Yes, ma'am.
One thing, based on what you just said as well, why I was asking about documentation, and I know we'll get there, is that, I mean, as a nurse, if I don't document something, it didn't happen, right? So when I think about attendance with regard to what Mr. Woods was just saying, it is concerning that we're at 50% are chronically absent, but is that a real number? I mean, it could be worse. Is that a misinterpretation?
Again, it could be worse. Like in this observation, the attendance recording is inconsistent, so there is a potential we were able to determine to what degree that could be.
Yes, ma'am. Dr. Hoskins, sorry.
Thank you. This discussion, these data remind me of a conversation that we were having about the consequences of asynchronous options and late turn-ins and online platforms that students may perceive as an alternative to being in person. If you can still make up the work, if it's all available for you later on, then it devalues that in-person requirement. And we had no solutions about that. I think we were just talking about that during another presentation during a board meeting, but that's kind of a real thing. The wonderful thing about all of the platforms, which I do support, I don't want anybody to interpret this to mean that I don't support those platforms, but the consequence is that there are some students that are doing sufficiently well that, just like some of us experienced in college, get an A in a class and never went to lecture. Well, some students are exercising some of those talents and skills in our district, it sounds like, from the data that you're presented and some of the academic outcomes that we're seeing.
Excellent point. I think that's another, this is obviously not where we want to be. So we'll be interested to hear your recommendations. And Dr. Watts, as you said, it's about management, management and accountability. So let's keep going.
All right. Second observation has to do with documentation of procedures for monitoring attendance. And we found several instances where procedures used are documented inconsistently. Here we were looking at a lot at school attendance committees. So each school has a committee that meets on a weekly basis to discuss, frequently absent students and issues related to attendance. We did find consistency in those committees. So there's required members of those committees where it's an administrator, school social worker, counselor, information specialist, or the core members of that group, and found across all the schools that those members were included. And then principals can include other members of the faculty as needed and as they deem appropriate. We asked about training provided to school staff related to student attendance and procedures for monitoring, and found some variability here, where some schools discussed it as being a beginning of the year process, others discussed it as beginning and middle of the year, and others discussed it as being kind of an ongoing training topic throughout the year. We tried to get a picture of what steps attendance committees are taking for students that are frequently absent. So we asked for information from the previous school year as to what committees had done, whether they, contact with parents, the letters that were sent home, social work referrals, home visits, all the options available, and found that there's no district requirement that this information be kept year to year. So that information was made available to us kind of inconsistently. Some schools had it, some schools didn't. But again, there was no requirement that that be retained year to year. And then we looked at attendance committee meetings, tried to get a picture for what they are discussing each week. So attendance committees are expected to meet weekly and document their meetings, what's discussed, who attends the meetings, and when the meetings occur. So we looked at meetings for the first few months of the school year, August through October, and found full documentation for 44 of the 126 meetings that we requested information for. There was no documentation available for 55 of those meetings. And then kind of some incomplete documentation provided for the rest.
Very quickly, just summarizing the purpose and mission of a school audit attendance committee.
A school attendance committee they meet weekly, so the information specialist generates a report of students who would have been absent, I believe, at least 5 days in most, and they'll discuss those students. So, do they have information? Has this student been frequently sick? Is this student experiencing housing issues, transportation issues, and determine steps to take to address those. So if it's a student who's frequently sick, maybe they're going to pursue hospital homebound as a learning option for that student. If it's...
And does the principal chair this committee? Or?
It's either the principal or an assistant principal.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. This question is actually for Dr. Watts, because I haven't seen that in action, that committee, so to speak, but I've seen the implementation of interventions of young people who are absent. So are there schools where maybe this is a vestige of previous practices and they've used some other agent or mode to bring out those interventions when they see a young person that's absent? Like, could that be deferred to, like, the caseworker for the child if they're in special education or something like that?
All of those things are potential, but I think the issue is that there's no documentation of it. So all of those interventions could be happening, but nobody is
Tracking it? Okay.
tracking it.
That makes sense, because when my son was absent or late, I got the multiple emails. It was in Power School. Like, I was made fully aware of everything. I did not feel like that. Well, you know what? With the onslaught of communication, it kind of felt like a team was notifying me, but I did not. I knew that those things were occurring. I knew the options that were available, but I didn't see that team in play, at his school.
I think it's an issue of, so you can employ the interventions, but it's important for the team to circle back around to say, is it working? Mm-hmm. So to monitor the impact of the intervention is important. And if you're not documenting the intervention, how, you don't know.
Yeah, that's a good point. Thank you.
I also just want to say probably a weekly meeting, when I think about all the other things principals and assistant principals are responsible for. A weekly meeting is a lot to have to document and house, and they're also expected to be in a multitude of other meetings where things are supposed to be documented. And it makes me wonder also, how much impact can one truly make in a week? So some of this may be an issue of, again, it's not to say things are not happening, they're just not being documented. So we need to think about what's reasonable in terms of documentation.
Yes, ma'am.
Along with that, I support that. I think that having fewer, if it means we're going to have documentation that leads to interventions successfully for students year over year, I think that's a great plan. Actually just spoke to a parent whose child had intracranial surgery a year ago, and the same social worker struggled to intervene to get the interventions that she needed for her child in the following year, because they didn't have any documentation of what had happened with her child, and therefore she had to go through the whole process again with them. When we have these committees in place, it's a little concerning that, you know, parents have to go through this. I mean, I think that's a good idea. We do it less if it means we get it documented.
Yes, ma'am, Dr. Robinson.
But I was thinking, if you reduce the number of meetings, you have that 5-day rule. If a kid is absent more than 5 days, then there's an issue. So if you're not meeting regularly, how are you going to keep track of those kids who hit that 5-day mark? And I don't think it have to be the principal that, you know, chairs the meeting, because the information specialist should be inputting the data and should be held accountable for the correct data, and the teacher should be held accountable if they're not reporting it to the information specialist in a way that protects the child and the family. So I think to limit the frequency of the meeting may not be a great idea, because if they hit that 5-day mark, you know, that the children and family, you know, are in jeopardy of violating a policy. So I just think we need to rethink it and think who should be responsible. And I think the whole accountability piece, what you talked about earlier, has got to be put in place.
Right, which means the principal has to be present, because at the school level, it is the principal who holds everyone else accountable. So if the principal is not a part of this process, then
And if I may provide just some clarification regarding the weekly.
You just introduce yourself real quick, I'm sorry.
Yes, Derek Butler,
Thank you,
Chief
sir.
Academic Officer. So just some clarification regarding the weekly attendance meetings. So although schools may be meeting weekly, they may be looking at different students each week. In some cases, and this may have been lifted up in the audit as well, that in some cases those team members, because of how many individuals are on the team, there may be a group of individuals that are looking at this particular group. There may be another a group of team members that are looking at students A through L. And so I think those are some of the differences that we have in how our weekly attendance team meetings are taking place across schools. So that's kind of how those weekly attendance teams look generally.
Thank you. So I'm glad to have a picture of what the meetings look like. I'm considering whether or not, you know, there are meetings and then there are meetings. Okay, so there are meetings I go to, I'm there, and that's the success. I'm there. That's it. But then there are other meetings that might be like an agile project meeting, a stand-up meeting. It's a 15-minute meeting, and we're checking in on a particular task or the progress of a task, or where I'm the federal government, so we have trackers. We're checking in on a tracker. The tracker is a spreadsheet where information that we're supposed to be managing and updating is parked, and people are updating that spreadsheet at whatever time. It's a shared document. The meeting is us reacting to the data that we're tracking. So that tracking is not happening in the meeting, and the meeting doesn't have to last that long. It's what are we going to do in response to the data that we're looking at? And it sounds like that's sort of happening. So I think what Dr. Robinson has said is true in a sense that check-in needs to happen in a timely manner for us to be compliant with the laws that govern us. But the way that mechanism works and how the principal checks in is really more about how that data is being managed and used to activate the interventions that we need to do to increase attendance and student performance. So, I mean, I don't think we necessarily need to dictate how the meetings need to happen, but I do think that leadership, like the chief academic officer, can look down into those meetings school by school, and when you see data like this, you know it's not working in some places, and invite or encourage people to reconsider how they convene on this so that they get the goal met. And they may be pleasantly surprised they can meet the goal in much less time if they change their approach.
Thank you. And I would just add, yeah, I understand that there are many meetings of principals, and I don't know if there's a more important function of a principal than making sure the students are in the school every day.
I agree.
So I think it was from a
I don't
priority
think a principal can be excluded from this. They
I
have-
agree. This leadership stuff, they're the
Especially
pivot
in
point.
certain schools where we know this is more of an acute problem.
Thank you.
Excuse me, I'd like to add one point
Please.
here. Raymond Barnes, Chief of Schools. The point I want to add on this is I want to make sure that we know that the meetings are taking place. What we want to tighten up is the documentation of the meeting and the monitoring and directing this as a result of the meeting that have taken place and the documentation and the action plans that were created with the support staff in ensuring that those students are getting the necessary supports and the encouragement to come back to school, and what that conversation looks like with their families that support that child at home. So documentation of those actions is where we need to tighten up, and the monitoring of that. But the meetings are taking place, and there are action planning around such students.
Thank you. But we're still at 50% chronic, so we got some work to do.
And as we think about that, just Monday in Cabinet, we had a conversation. It's important to lay other data on top of this data. So not just looking at attendance in high school overall. Is this a result of disciplinary infractions? Is this more acute at certain grade levels? We know from that discussion, ninth grade is really the zone in area where we see the most acute issues around attendance. So it's looking at attendance data and other data
Right.
that you triangulate to help get to the issue.
That's an excellent point.
Our recommendations for this observation are to create procedures to review attendance committee meeting documentation to ensure that meetings consistently occur, and to provide feedback on their efficiency. We recommend reviewing procedures related to documentation to determine whether records should be retained past the current school year, and if so, what that time frame should be. And we recommend ensuring that guidance related to recording and monitoring student attendance is provided to teachers and school staff consistently throughout the district. Our third observation has to do with identifying factors that contribute to absenteeism. So chronic absenteeism, again, has increased significantly across the state, and districts should really be identifying contributing factors, addressing barriers, and actively promoting attendance. So those are the things we were looking at.
Jack, I'm sorry, we didn't go over the management action plan for observation 2 on page 13.
Oh, sorry.
These are all dated the 3 management corrective actions are dated to be completed in July and June. That seems like a long way from February.
So the first management action is really ongoing and has already started in a lot of ways. We've provided those guidance documents and resources to our school attendance committees so that they can begin capturing that documentation now. Many of them had some form, but we wanted to standardize so that there's some consistency across our schools. And that's taking place through our district attendance support team, who's coming alongside each of our schools to provide that specific support. And in fact, part of the work that we've been doing here over the last few months is really providing them what an effective attendance team looks like. So our goal is to have all of that fully in place for all of our teams at the beginning of next year. But that work is ongoing, has already started.
And I think, Mr. Woods, it's a issue of defining. So we could have these things in place, like I could create a template tonight
Right.
and check that box and say, I'm done with the template.
Yeah.
I think the issue is really around change management and cascading it down to schools and ensuring that it's internalized and actually being used, which is why you see the timeline pushed out.
Okay.
If it's just in terms of a completion of a task, again, I could create a template
Right.
tonight.
Okay,
But
thank you.
if
That
people are
clarifies it.
using it, that's a whole different story.
Right. Yeah. I just think, and I agree with you. It's just a.
Right,
This
it's
if they're
urgent.
not in school, then we're not getting our tier 1 education time, right? So, I mean, that's what we're here to do. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Jack. I just noticed that.
So again, we were looking at how the district identifies contributing factors, addressing barriers, and actively promoting attendance. We asked teachers and school staff about factors contributing to student absences. We found some of those factors are consistent across schools at all levels, while others are more specific to different grade bands. So, high school students have different factors affecting attendance than elementary students. We found some of those barriers are things that are kind of easily controlled by the district. It can be easily, not easily, but can be directly affected by district. Others are more affected by outside factors. We found that the school-based strategies in place to promote attendance, those varied across different grade bands as well. And we found that district-level strategies, there's sessions at leadership meetings related to student attendance. Communications department has the active kind of Attendance Matters campaign that's ongoing. So our recommendations for this observation are to identify methods to formally integrate input from external stakeholders into systems currently in place to identify and address factors contributing to student absenteeism. And we recommend establishing systems to provide school attendance committees with formal support and supervision from district level staff.
Are there any comments? Go ahead.
Oh, I do.
Mr. Moss has a comment.
Something positive. So last week we were at Savannah Chatham Day, and one of my board members, Sean Katchmar, and I were able to meet with the governor's office of Student Achievement. Yes, and included in that meeting were two gentlemen, two business people who are really pushing what are called business ambassadors. This is where we get the community involved, and I think this is a golden opportunity where you reach out to the business community to provide incentives to our students that are consistent with their attendance. I remember when I was growing up, back in the days of no, I'm sorry, but I mean, it's like every month it was just like who had the best attendance, and you may have gotten ice cream, you may have gotten a gift certificate or whatever. I think this is a golden opportunity for us to reach out to the business community to help us with this, because attendance is important. So let's get everybody involved. So.
You reading your recommendations?
Oh, I thought I already had. So identifying ways to formally integrate input from external stakeholders into systems that are currently in place to identify and address factors that contribute to student absenteeism, and establish systems to provide school attendance committees with formal support and supervision from district level staff.
Thank you. That's the last one in the audit. So are there any overall comments on this audit? Yes, ma'am.
Thanks. Just a general comment. I mean, some of the nature of what the findings are indicate that the data may not be completely accurate in terms of the missing documentation. So I'm not very clear on whether the absenteeism is as absolute, although we know we have strong absenteeism, whether the absenteeism is absolute or whether the record keeping is severely flawed and is amplifying our perception of absenteeism. Anybody have a feel about that?
I agree. Because the documentation is not there, the data, I could question a lot about the data.
Okay.
But we do acknowledge fully that attendance, regardless of the documentation, are kids coming to school at the same level and rate in which they were prior to the pandemic? I think unequivocally we could say the answer to that is no.
Right.
And I do think it's a matter of also, are we going to redefine what attendance is?
Mm-hmm.
Is attendance sitting in the seat every single day, or is there credit for completion of work and showing mastery of work regardless of coming to sit in the seat every day? So what is attendance?
So I think that's a really important question, especially for young people who are in programs for which transportation is not offered. If you are a student in a choice program and your absentee rate is affected by your transportation, that's an important thing to know. But also for our young people who are in our alternative programs, because to transition out of an alternative program, one of the things that we look at is, was the child there, was the learner there? How did they perform while they were there? And maybe in some ways they're even more disadvantaged of how we are defining attendance than other young people. So I'd be interested in hearing what attendance should look like now in the modern age. But thanks, I get it. Attendance is still not great, even if our numbers aren't perfect.
Right.
It's still not great. Okay, thank you.
About a year ago, Dr. Watts named attendance our second North Star. And I guess it's so alarming to me that we're here with attendance, which is fundamental. You're either there or you're not. And if we want to redefine it, I mean, based on what we're talking about, we can talk about that. But along with what Dr. Hoskins-Brown said, in this audit, it said that 6 schools had students recorded as absent on a day that schools were closed. So, I mean, it feels a little bit like, I don't even, what kind of fidelity am I placing in what's happening? And along the lines of what we can do for students, we need to focus on that. They need the supports to get to class, but how do we know how to intervene if it's not being documented? I mean, I know people have a lot going on. I understand that. I'm sympathetic to that. But this is so crucial. This is the one thing that I feel like we should get right and we should prioritize. So it seems like we lack buy-in. And to me, that doesn't seem like something, I guess, that we need to necessarily outline. You named it our second North Star. And attendance is expected. So I am concerned. I think we need to take this seriously. And along with the plan, I think we need accountability. And is there any way that we can find this information out on a regular basis to see how teachers are doing that we would have access to prior to another full-on audit?
So there are dashboards internally that we have access to that gives us daily attendance. We can look at it week to week. I don't know the extent to which that's available to the public, but there are ways for us to monitor attendance very closely internally.
Yes, ma'am.
I just had a quick question. While we're talking about defining attendance, do we have any data that correlates grades with absenteeism?
That was another point I was going to bring up when we talk about other data. So if a student is chronically absent, it begs the question, how are they performing in school? Because again, defining attendance is important, because if a student, and I've had students tell me this, very smart students tell me, I don't need to go to school because I can do everything I need to do online and turn in the work and demonstrate mastery. So why do I physically need to go to school? I've had students in this district tell me that. But we know we also have students who don't go to school and their grades are suffering from it. And so it begs the question around grading, promotion, and retention as well. So when we're talking about this as a cabinet, we're looking at all of those policies, not just attendance. We're also looking at our grading policy, and the board can expect some revisions around that. And we will also need to take a deeper, closer look at our retention and promotion policy. Because right now, in our district, attendance is not a factor for promotion or retention. A kid could miss 50 days of school, and if they pass the class, they pass.
Thank you.
Are there any other comments? Okay. I just would close with, it's a cliche, but this is a leadership issue. And I think fundamentally, you're right, that the principal is the pivot point. So how do we tie this metric to the principal's evaluation might be something worth considering. So with that, I'll entertain a motion to accept the audit as submitted. Second. It's been properly moved and seconded that we adopt or recommend to the board the audit of student attendance. All in favor? The audit is accepted. Ms. Underwood?
Thank you. The next audit slated for this morning is the audit, compliance audit of the board policy LEC booster clubs. We had 3 objectives: to review the district's policies and procedures. That's our normal compliance review that we do. Review each booster club's constitution and bylaws and determine adherence to the rules defined for each club. And to review how the district monitors booster clubs and to identify any gaps or other areas of improvement. So as we know, booster clubs are parent organizations designed to support the school they are connected through financial means. They have bylaws to define their roles and responsibilities, along with their financial responsibilities. The funding sources include donations or fundraising activities conducted by parents and/or students. Booster clubs must follow all tax laws for federal tax reporting and accounting requirements. Any funds provided by the booster club to a school must be in the form of a check and are considered a donation to the school district. Booster clubs indirectly report to the principal or principal designee of the school, and usually that designee is the athletic director. So we really had one observation and one other matter. The first observation was inconsistent implementation. The language within the bylaws of the district's booster club is inconsistent in their compliance with the district's board regulation LEC booster clubs, as well as the structure of their bylaws. And of course, as when we make reference to board policy, we're also referencing the supporting regulation as well. Principals are given authority to approve booster clubs, but are not provided guidance to implement the rules outlined in the regulation, and there's 17 points within that regulation. So one of the things we wanted to highlight of our review is that we conducted compliance tests against the board policy and regulation by selecting a sample of guidance points within the district's board regulation. And we identified 4 areas. The first one was defined objectives and purpose, right? How will this booster club support the district and the school? The next area was the activities planned with the school. That would be the approval process. Procedures for the financial audit, that would be the monitoring component, and procedures for dissolving, that would be protection of the remaining funds or assets that would have remained within that the checking account that exists. So we conducted our review by reviewing the bylaws of each booster club, and we found that all schools had bylaws that complied with the requirements. When it came to activities planned with schools, 3 out of the 16. And I'm sorry, let me go back. So this is a small population, right? So what we found for school year 25, we found 7 schools had 1 or more booster clubs and a total of 16 active booster clubs for school year 25. And this includes 5 high schools, one K-8, and one middle school. So let me clarify that. So it may be a small grouping, but I'll give you an example. Just one support structure for a high school was a 90,000 charter bus support. Okay, so it may be a small amount, but there could be, especially at the high school level, a lot of financial support for these schools. Procedures for financial audit, 11 out of the 16 bylaws refer to this financial audit as required by the regulation. And procedures for dissolving a booster, 8 of the 16 refer to the process. So in addition, we interviewed principals to see how their practices existed across the district as it surrounded this regulation and their interaction with their boosters. I'm only going to highlight 4 of the points that we reviewed, but one of the questions was, did you receive the bylaws of your booster, approved budget, and listing of members before activities began each year? 3 principals received the information, 1 asked, but the booster did not provide the information, and the remaining 4 did not receive the information, however, they did not ask. Describe the written approval process for the activities, projects, or fundraisers. The approval process varies from school to school. 4 of the schools did not know their process. How often do you receive a financial report? The majority of the principals responded they either do not get it or they have to request it to review it. And then, do you know the process of dissolving a booster? And no principal knew that process. So what we did is we looked to see if there was other guidance. We found that there was from other districts with more detail. So we have provided that to management, and that's really where the basis of our recommendation was. Like, okay, you have the 17 points, but what do these 17 points look like? You know, how are we supposed to implement that? How are we supposed to communicate that to our boosters? And what should we expect from our boosters as well? So we recommended they develop a comprehensive procedures that align with the district's board policy and regulation, ensuring strict compliance with expectations and clearly defining role responsibilities for all parties as defined in the regulation.
Thank you. Any comments? My only comment would be that, Dr. Watts, in the sense of talking about everything principals do, I know that the board has a very, very strong and powerful and wise attorney. Perhaps there's a template of booster bylaws that just gets issued, and then that takes something off the principal's plate.
Yes.
And we're paying that guy anyway, right, Mr. Moss?
All right, so
Yes, ma'am.
also during the course of this audit, we found another area of risk that wasn't in our initial scope of our objectives, but we thought we needed to lift up. So financial information in the school compliance report of gender equity in sports provided to the Georgia DOE was not verified by the Office of Finance before submission. So each year, the LEAs are required to report up to the Georgia DOE the participation rates as well as the financial information as it becomes to athletic programs as defined by the Georgia High School Association. And what we found is the financial table within the report should capture all financial benefits to the male athletic program as well as female athletic program. This should include actual expenditures, donations of real and personal property, donations of in-kind services, as well as any other direct or indirect financial benefit. It is also recommended by the Georgia DOE that schools retain for their records copies of computations made and estimates used to substantiate the expenditure data, as well as any accompanying documentation as to how the figures were determined. So in our review, we interviewed the athletics department as well as the Office of Finance. The current practice does not include a review of the from finance before the submission, just a review from the Title IX coordinator to ensure that we are in compliance with all Title IX, all Title IX laws. So what we're recommending is that the Office of Academic Excellence and Office of Finance, because Office of Academic Excellence is where the athletic department at the district level sits, establish a review process for the school compliance report on the gender equity in sports, ensuring that all relevant departments responsible for managing, supporting, or accounting for the information have the opportunity to verify its accuracy.
Just one quick adjustment to that, and I should have called it before today. The athletics department actually sits under Dr. Barnes, and it's
Okay, so
the
then
Office of School Leadership.
And Dr. Robinson, you had a comment?
I was just thinking, I looked at this report.
Microphone.
I was just thinking, when we take this report out of draft, would we consider numbering the pages?
We can do that, yes.
It's kind of hard to follow when,
I agree.
you know.
Were there any other comments? Thank you, Leah. We do also have to vote to send this one to the school board as well. Is there a motion? It's been properly moved and seconded that we submit the compliance of audit board policy of LAC Booster Clubs to the school board. All in favor? The audit is accepted. Leah, are we voting on number 5?
Yes, you need to yearly do a
Okay.
revote for the audit committee charter.
And just quickly, because we're going to be sensitive to everyone's times, can you just go over whatever the changes that needed to be made?
So at this time, there's no contextual changes to, how the audit committee functions. That was changed, I believe, last year, where we updated the quorum from 4 to 5. So none of those have changed. The only key wording that we're removing is as you should see, it shows page 10, but it's on number 2, under internal control, accounting and control systems and processes for meeting board goals. Where it says provide oversight of internal audit function, we're removing the word presentation because we haven't been presenting to the Board of Education on a normal basis. That was a practice that occurred many, many years ago, but now it's only at request if needed. So we want to remove that word so that it says reviewing audit results and approving internal audit reports for recommendation and approval to the Board of Education, not necessarily by presentation to the Board of Education.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. That relates to one of the comments I had, because on the last page, it says report committee activities to the board on a regular basis. And my question was, how are we doing this? Because I don't think that we're doing that.
So what we do is the summary of audit reports, that's part of the strategic plan, that shows our audits that we've conducted for the whole year, as well as management's involvement with that as well. So that's how, in the past, it has always, been presented that way. Also, when we do the audit plan for the next year, if there's any carryover that occurs, it reflects there, or if there's any carryover that does not occur because strategic plans, risk have changed and there's no need for that previous, it's documented in that audit plan as well.
So those are single annual presentations, not regular presentations.
Right.
Yeah, so that's kind of where I was going to with the language. The same reason
Okay.
that you eliminated it on page 10.
Okay.
We probably should eliminate or modify that second
last-
to the last bullet to either say annual or just delete it.
Okay.
The other, first bullet point on that last page, consider the results of reviews by outside organizations and the implications for the district systems of control. Are we doing that besides our Baldwin and Jenkins report? Like, what other reviews or results from organizations are we utilizing?
So previous in the summary of reports, what would happen, any external ones that came out that were public would be presented on there as well. So we have that section in the summary reports as external reports as well as internal audits. So that's where that was presented. But I do want to go back to a certain language within this charter that for each of these bullets, the statement goes back to accomplish this, and this is on page 10, the committee at its discretion will. So at any point, if you say, we want these to come here, or, it's at your discretion. But for clarity, I see where where you were saying, how does this occur? Because it seems quite open. So if you want us to.
Yeah, I just think it looks negligent. If we have something that says at our discretion, we're going to do something on a regular basis, and yet we haven't done it for multiple years.
Right.
Right, are we really doing it?
But I don't feel strongly about that. The only comment I do feel strongly about is that the members of the board on page 8, I think it should say at some place in there should include at least one accounting professional.
Okay.
Because I think it's a good practice. I think we've been doing it, Yes.
We got him right
I
down there. We
understand.
hoodwinked him right in.
Yeah, welcome. But I think it ought to be part of our bylaws that we uphold that as a value.
Okay.
Okay, I agree.
I agree.
Okay, thank you.
Can this come back next month, Leah, or do we need to vote on this now?
Yeah, well, I'll make the changes and it'll come back.
Perfect.
It's
Yep.
kind of a first read at this point. So let me clarify, you said a financial
An accounting professional.
accounting professional. Okay, I just wanted to clarify that.
I mean, I would say CPA, but I think an accounting professional, it would accommodate a diversity of individuals.
Correct.
All right. Leah, in the interest of time, I think we'll forego the informational items, and we are adjourned. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.